Dash, you're nothing but a servant. The Duke sneered. Until she revealed the royal birthmark before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now, let's start. In a society where one's worth is measured by the grandeur of their title and the depth of their pockets, our tale begins not in the hallowed halls of aristocracy, but in the servants' quarters of Thornfield Hall, where our heroine, Miss Ruby Valemont, has just dropped a priceless Sevres teacup. "Oh, bother," Ruby muttered, frantically gathering the porcelain shards. The Dowager Duchess of Langley would have her head for this, and Ruby could ill afford to lose her position. Not when her mysterious past remained precisely that, mysterious, even to herself. And yes, dear listeners, our Ruby is indeed more than she appears. But patience! All shall be revealed in due course. Your narrator never disappoints. What catastrophe has befallen my grandmother's china now? The deep voice from the doorway made Ruby's heart sink faster than a débutante's hopes when the season's most eligible bachelor announces his engagement to another. There stood the Duke of Langley himself, Lord Thomas Lockwood, in all his imposing glory. At 28, he possessed the haughty demeanor that only generations of unchallenged privilege can bestow, along with, it must be admitted, shoulders broad enough to make even the most level-headed lady swoon. "Your Grace," Ruby curtsied, keeping her eyes fixed on the floor. "I apologize for the accident. I shall replace it from my wages." The Duke raised an eyebrow that could cut glass. "With what coin, pray tell?" "This cup alone costs more than you would earn in a decade." "Then I shall work for a decade," Ruby replied, lifting her gaze to meet his. And here, dear listeners, our Duke experienced a most unusual sensation. For within Ruby's eyes, a most uncommon shade of violet, burned a dignity no servant had any business possessing. "You're nothing but a servant," the Duke sneered, though something in his voice wavered. "Remember your place." Had he been less distracted by her impertinent gaze, he might have noticed Ruby's hand instinctively covering her right shoulder, where beneath layers of serviceable cotton lay a birthmark shaped like a crown, a birthmark that matched the one detailed in royal records as belonging to the long-lost Princess Rosalind of Valoria. But alas, the Duke stormed away, leaving Ruby to her broken teacup and broken spirits. Now, I know what you're thinking, dear listeners. Our Duke seems a touch unkind. But do reserve judgment. The best men often make the worst first impressions. Just ask any matron who has successfully married off her daughters. The next evening found half of London's elite gathered at Langley House for the Dowager Duchess's annual spring ball. The event was, as always, the pinnacle of early-season entertainments, a chance for fresh-faced débutantes to secure a dance with an eligible bachelor, for matrons to compare the achievements of their offspring, and for gentlemen to consume enough brandy to make even the plainest wallflower appear a diamond of the first water. "Thomas, darling," cooed Lady Penelope Whitmore, batting eyelashes so heavily laden with false enhancements that one wondered how she managed to lift her lids at all. "You've been positively negligent in your attentions this evening." The Duke, who had been watching the servants with unusual interest, offered a tight smile. "Forgive me, Lady Penelope. I find myself distracted by estate matters." "Estate matters?" "At a ball." Lady Penelope tittered. "How deliciously serious you are." What the Duke could not admit, even to himself, was that his distraction stemmed from the curious absence of a certain violet-eyed servant. After yesterday's incident, he had expected to see Ruby working the event, perhaps serving refreshments or assisting with ladies' wraps. Yet she was nowhere to be found. And no, dear listeners, our Duke's interest was not merely that of an employer concerned about staffing. Though he would sooner dance a waltz with his grandmother's pet corgi than admit it. "Mother," the Duke approached the Dowager Duchess, who was holding court among a circle of society matrons. "A word, if you please." The Dowager Duchess, a formidable woman whose turbaned head had never bowed to anyone save the king himself, excused herself with regal grace. "What is it, Thomas?" "Lady Penelope is positively desperate for your attention, and the Countess of Marston has been hinting most unsubtly about her daughter's accomplishments on the pianoforte. The servant girl, Ruby. Where is she this evening?" The dowager's eyebrows rose so high they nearly disappeared beneath her turban. The new maid? I dismissed her this morning. After the incident with my Sevres cup. You dismissed her? The Duke's voice rose enough to draw curious glances. He lowered it immediately. That seems excessive. Since when do you concern yourself with the household staff, Thomas? Besides, there was something odd about that girl. Too educated for her station. I suspect she may have been a governess fallen on hard times, or worse. The Duke's jaw tightened. Where would she go? How should I know? Back to whatever mysterious place she came from, I suppose. The dowager patted her son's arm. Now, do dance with Lady Penelope. Her father's shipping interests would align nicely with our investments in the West Indies. But Thomas was already striding away, much to the consternation of his mother and the disappointment of every marriage-minded lady in the ballroom. And here, dear listeners, we find our first evidence that beneath the Duke's frosty exterior beats a heart capable of more than calculating business advantages. Most intriguing, is it not? Asterisk 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 Ruby Valemont sat huddled in a corner of the Gilded Swan, a coaching inn of middling reputation on the outskirts of London. With her meagre possessions packed in a single valise and her last coin spent on a bowl of watery stew, her future stretched before her like an uncharted sea. Another serving, miss. The kindly innkeeper's wife appeared at her table. I cannot afford it, I'm afraid, Ruby admitted. No matter. You look like you need it more than we need the coin. The woman set down a chunk of bread. Besides, we're hiring. Need a serving girl, if you're interested. Ruby's relief was palpable. I would be most grateful. Good. You can start tomorrow. There's a small room in the attic. Not much, but it's clean. As the woman departed, Ruby allowed herself a moment of gratitude. Then, as was her habit when alone, she slipped her hand beneath her collar to touch the crown-shaped mark on her shoulder, the only link to her forgotten past. 20 years ago, the small kingdom of Valoria had been overtaken by revolutionaries. The royal family was believed executed, save for rumors that the infant princess had been smuggled to England by a loyal servant. Ruby had been raised in a series of orphanages with nothing but the birthmark and a small medallion bearing the Valerian crest as clues to her origin. A fine tale for a penny novel, she murmured to herself. But hardly bread and butter. The inn door flew open with a gust of spring rain, and Ruby glanced up, then promptly ducked her head as the Duke of Langley himself strode in, looking as out of place in the humble establishment as a peacock in a henhouse. Yes, listeners. Our Duke has tracked her down already. One might almost suspect him of harboring feelings beneath that aristocratic facade. Ruby shrank further into her corner, but it was too late. The Duke's gaze locked on her with the precision of a hunter spotting his quarry. Miss Valemont, he said, approaching her table with long strides. You are remarkably difficult to locate. Your Grace, Ruby replied, rising to curtsy. I cannot imagine why you would waste effort looking for me at all. Nor can I, the Duke admitted, looking genuinely perplexed by his own actions. Yet here I stand. An awkward silence fell between them, broken only when the innkeeper's wife returned, eyes wide at finding such distinguished company in her establishment. Your Grace, she curtsied deeply. What an honor. Our best room is available, if you require accommodation. That won't be necessary, the Duke replied. I merely need to speak with Miss Valemont. Privately. Ruby's heart fluttered traitorously. I have nothing to say that requires privacy, Your Grace. I disagree. His tone brooked no argument. There is a private parlor, I presume. Minutes later, they were seated in a small room warmed by a modest fire. The Duke looked around with barely concealed distaste at the faded furnishings before fixing his attention on Ruby. My mother acted hastily in dismissing you, he said without preamble. I've come to offer you reinstatement. Ruby blinked in surprise. Why would you do that? Because? The Duke hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to explaining himself to anyone, let alone a servant. Because I spoke harshly yesterday. The cup was merely an object. Your treatment was undeserved. Mark this moment, dear listeners. The Duke of Langley, known throughout London for his unyielding nature, has just offered something dangerously close to an apology. The sky may indeed fall next. I appreciate the gesture, Your Grace, but I cannot return, Ruby said. I've accepted a position here. The Duke's expression darkened. As a serving girl at a coaching inn? That's absurd. The position at Langley House offers far better prospects. Perhaps, but here I might be treated with a modicum of human dignity. You dare suggest, I dare speak the truth, Your Grace. Yesterday you reminded me that I am nothing but a servant. Today I choose to be a servant where such status does not equate to nothingness. Colour flooded the Duke's face, an intriguing mixture of anger and something that might have been shame. You misunderstood my meaning. Did I? Then pray enlighten me. I meant. He faltered, then straightened his shoulders. It doesn't matter what I meant. I'm offering you a position with higher wages and better conditions. Why? Must you question everything? When a duke chases a maid through London to offer her employment, yes, I believe questions are warranted. The Duke ran a hand through his usually immaculate hair. There is something about you, Miss Valemont. Something that doesn't align with your station. I find it curious. Ruby's hand instinctively moved to her shoulder, drawing the Duke's attention. You're injured, he asked, his tone softening unexpectedly. No, Your Grace. Merely an old habit. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something electric passed between them, a recognition that transcended their vastly different stations. The Duke cleared his throat. Return to Langley House, Miss Valemont. Not as a maid, but as my grandmother's companion. The position offers private quarters and double the salary. A companion? But I have no references, no qualifications, you speak like an educated woman. You carry yourself with uncommon grace. My grandmother finds most companions tedious, but I suspect you might actually engage her interest. Ruby hesitated. The position would place her in the Duke's orbit daily, a prospect both thrilling and dangerous. I shall consider it, she finally said. Do that. The Duke rose to leave, then paused. And Miss Valemont? In the future, should I speak inappropriately, you have my permission to correct me. With that extraordinary statement, he departed, leaving Ruby to wonder if perhaps she had misjudged the Duke of Langley. Oh, my dear listeners, the plot thickens like Mrs. Rutledge's infamous clotted cream. Our Duke shows unexpected depths, while our Ruby stands at a crossroads. And we haven't even revealed her royal connections yet. Do stay tuned. The Dowager Duchess of Langley was not pleased. A former maid as my companion? Have you taken complete leave of your senses, Thomas? They stood in the Dowager's private sitting room, where Thomas had just informed his grandmother of Ruby's imminent arrival in her new capacity. She is well-spoken and intelligent, Thomas replied. You'll find her a more stimulating companion than the simpering misses you've employed previously. That's beside the point. What will people say? The gossip alone. Since when have you concerned yourself with gossip, grandmother? I distinctly recall you telling the Prince Regent himself that his new waistcoat made him look like an overripe pumpkin. A smile tugged at the Dowager's lips despite her irritation. That was different. He asked for my opinion. Give Miss Valemont a chance. If you find her unsuitable after a fortnight, I won't interfere with your decision to dismiss her. The Dowager studied her grandson with shrewd eyes. You've never taken such interest in my companions before. Is there something I should know about this girl? Nothing beyond what I've told you. The Dowager's expression suggested she believed this about as much as she believed in fairies at the bottom of the garden. Very well. A fortnight. But she'll need proper clothing. I won't have my companion dressed like a servant. Thomas nodded, relief evident in his features. I've already arranged for the modiste to call this afternoon. Have you indeed? How very thorough of you. Our Duke moves quickly, does he not? And the Dowager sees more than she lets on. The Tun's matriarchs always do, my dears. Their lorgnettes might as well be spyglasses for all they observe. ****** Ruby's arrival at Langley House in her new capacity created precisely the stir one might expect. The servants whispered behind their hands, the housekeeper sniffed with disapproval, and the butler looked as though he had swallowed something particularly sour. Only Mrs. Winters, the cook, offered genuine warmth. Always thought you were meant for better things, love. Though mind you don't forget your old friends below stairs. Ruby was shown to a pretty chamber adjoining the Dowager's rooms, a vast improvement over her previous accommodations in the attic with 3 other maids. The modiste arrived promptly, measuring Ruby for a modest but appropriate wardrobe befitting her new station. The Duke was most specific about the colors, the modiste commented as she pinned fabric. "Blues and lavenders to complement your eyes," he said. Ruby's cheeks warmed. His Grace has a keen eye for detail, it seems. Indeed. Most gentlemen can barely tell silk from satin, let alone concern themselves with complementary colors. By the time Ruby presented herself to the Dowager Duchess the following morning, she was attired in a simple but elegant morning dress of periwinkle blue, her dark hair arranged in a becoming style that emphasized her delicate features. The Dowager adjusted her spectacles as Ruby entered the morning room. "Well, you clean up tolerably well. Let us see if your mind matches your appearance. Do you read, Miss Valemont?" "Yes, Your Grace. Whenever opportunity permits." "And what do you read?" "Fashion plates. Gothic romances. I enjoy poetry, Wordsworth and Byron particularly. Also history and political philosophy when I can access such texts." The Dowager's eyebrows rose. "Political philosophy? Unusual interests for a maid." "I was not always a maid, Your Grace." "No? What were you before?" Ruby hesitated. "An orphan with access to a decent library, thanks to a kind benefactor." Not entirely untrue. The headmistress at her last orphanage had indeed allowed Ruby access to her personal collection, recognizing the girl's unusual intelligence. "Interesting. Can you play piquet?" "Yes, Your Grace." "Good. My last companion cheated abominably and still managed to lose. Fetch the cards. And while we play, you can tell me the real reason my grandson has taken such interest in your welfare." Ruby nearly dropped the card box. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "Come now, girl. Thomas hasn't shown interest in anything but his estates and investments since that Harrington chit jilted him 3 years ago. Yet suddenly he's chasing maids across London and arranging for new wardrobes. Perhaps he simply felt responsible after speaking harshly to me." The Dowager snorted most unduchess-like. "Thomas has spoken harshly to half of London at some point. He's never chased after any of them with job offers." As Ruby dealt the cards, she felt the weight of the Dowager's scrutiny. "I truly cannot explain His Grace's actions, Your Grace." "No matter. I shall observe and draw my own conclusions. Your lead, Miss Valemont." And observe she will, dear listeners. Nothing escapes the Dowager's eagle eye, are not her grandson's unusual behavior, nor the crown-shaped mark visible on Ruby's shoulder when her shawl slips during their card game. But the Dowager keeps her own counsel, for now. *****. The following weeks brought dramatic changes to Ruby's circumstances. As the Dowager's companion, she entered a curious middle ground, neither servant nor equal, yet privy to the intimate workings of one of England's most prestigious households. The Dowager, contrary to all expectations, took to Ruby immediately. They spent mornings reading correspondence and newspapers, afternoons playing cards or taking gentle walks in the garden, and evenings conversing about everything from politics to poetry. "You're wasted as a companion," the Dowager remarked one evening as Ruby read aloud from a volume of Byron. "With your mind and bearing, you should have been born to privilege." Ruby's hand trembled slightly as she turned the page. "We cannot choose our circumstances of birth, Your Grace." "No, but circumstances can change." Speaking of which, we attend Lady Westmoreland's musicale tomorrow evening. You shall accompany me." Ruby looked up in alarm. "Surely that wouldn't be appropriate. I'm your companion, not a what? A lady." The Dowager's eyes twinkled. "You comport yourself better than half the so-called ladies of my acquaintance. Besides, I need someone sensible to converse with when the musical portion grows tedious." And so it was that Ruby found herself attired in her finest new gown, a creation of lavender silk that brought out the unusual colour of her eyes, seated beside the Dowager Duchess in one of London's most exclusive drawing rooms. "The Dowager brings her companion," whispered one matron to another. "How extraordinary!" "They say the girl was a servant mere weeks ago," came the reply. "Though I must admit, she carries herself remarkably well." Ruby pretended not to hear, focusing instead on the young lady massacring a Mozart sonata at the pianoforte. The Dowager, less inclined to politeness, winced audibly at a particularly discordant passage. "If that girl's playing is accomplished, then I'm the Queen of Sheba," she muttered to Ruby, who struggled to maintain her composure. A deep voice from behind them joined the conversation. "I believe even Mozart himself would struggle to recognize his composition." Ruby's heart leapt at the Duke's voice. She had seen little of him since taking up her new position, as he spent most days attending to business in the city or at his club. "Thomas," the Dowager greeted him. "I didn't expect to see you at such an event. You normally avoid musicales like the plague." "I had business nearby and thought I would make an appearance." His eyes, however, were fixed on Ruby, taking in her transformed appearance with unconcealed appreciation. "Miss Valemont," he said with a formal bow. "You look, well." "Thank you, Your Grace." Ruby cursed inwardly at the breathlessness in her voice. "Miss Valemont has been an exemplary companion," the Dowager announced. "Her fortnight's trial ended last week, and I've engaged her permanently." The Duke's smile was genuine. "Excellent news. Perhaps Miss Valemont would enjoy a turn about the room. The current musical selection is rather challenging." Before Ruby could formulate a response, the Dowager waved them away. Yes, go. Save my companion from this dreadful caterwauling. I shall close my eyes and pretend to doze." A strategic maneuver by our clever Dowager. Nothing like feigned sleep to give young people privacy while still maintaining propriety. Take note, ambitious mammas. Thomas offered his arm, and Ruby placed her gloved hand upon it, acutely aware of the stares following them as they strolled toward a less crowded corner of the room. "You've caused quite a stir this evening," the Duke commented. "Half the ton is wondering who you are and how you captivated my grandmother so thoroughly. And the other half is speculating on why I'm walking with you instead of pursuing Lady Elizabeth Harmon, whom my mother has been promoting as this season's most advantageous match." Ruby glanced across the room at a stunning blonde who was watching them with narrowed eyes. "She's very beautiful. She is also vapid, mercenary, and has the conversational depth of a puddle," the Duke replied. "Whereas you, Miss Valemont, remain an intriguing mystery. There's little mysterious about me, Your Grace." "No? Then why do you touch your right shoulder whenever you're nervous or thoughtful?" His voice lowered. "What are you hiding beneath those modestly cut gowns?" Ruby froze, her face paling. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." The Duke's expression softened unexpectedly. "Whatever it is, you need not fear me, Ruby." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a shiver down her spine. Before she could respond, however, they were interrupted by the arrival of a haughty-looking gentleman with iron-grey hair and cold eyes. "Langley," the man nodded curtly. "Unusual company you keep these days." "Lord Ravenscroft," the Duke replied, his tone cooling noticeably. "May I present Miss Ruby Valemont, my grandmother's companion?" Lord Ravenscroft's gaze swept over Ruby dismissively until it reached her face, where his expression changed dramatically. He stared at her with such intensity that Ruby instinctively stepped closer to the Duke. "Valemont, did you say?" Ravenscroft's voice had acquired a strange edge. "An unusual name. Your family, miss?" "I have none, my lord. I was orphaned as an infant." "Indeed? How convenient." With a curt nod, he strode away, leaving Ruby trembling slightly. "What an unpleasant man," she murmured. The Duke's face had darkened. Ravenscroft has that effect on most people. He's known for his involvement in foreign affairs, particularly with troubled states in Eastern Europe. He spent considerable time in Valoria during their revolution. Ruby's head snapped up. Valoria? A small kingdom, now a republic. There was quite a bloody revolution there some 20 years ago. The Duke studied her reaction carefully. "The name means something to you." Before Ruby could answer, the Dowager signaled from across the room, saving her from having to explain her reaction. "My grandmother requires us," the Duke said, offering his arm once more. "But our conversation is not concluded, Miss Valemont." "Oh my!" Lord Ravenscroft enters the scene with the subtlety of a thunderclap, and our Duke grows ever more curious about Ruby's secrets. The plot, dear listeners, continues to thicken most deliciously. ******. The encounter with Lord Ravenscroft left Ruby deeply unsettled. Could it be mere coincidence that the Duke had mentioned Valoria, or that Ravenscroft had reacted so strangely to her name and appearance? For days afterward, she caught herself looking over her shoulder, half expecting to find the cold-eyed lord watching her. Her unease was not helped by the Duke's increased presence at Langley House. Where before he had spent most days away on business, now he frequently joined Ruby and the Dowager for tea or accompanied them on their afternoon drives in the park. "You hover like a mother hen," the Dowager complained one afternoon as they returned from such an outing. "One might think you've developed an interest in my companion, Thomas." The Duke, walking between the two women, merely smiled. "I find Miss Valemont's conversation stimulating. A rare quality in London society. HMPH. Well, don't stimulate her too much. I need her sharp wits for our evening game of piquet." As they entered the grand foyer of Langley House, the butler approached with a silver tray bearing a single letter. "For Miss Valemont, Your Grace," he announced with evident disapproval. Ruby accepted the missive with surprise. "How curious. I received no correspondence." The letter bore no return direction, only her name written in a bold, masculine hand. She opened it with growing apprehension, then gasped at its contents. "What is it?" the Duke demanded, his tone sharp with concern. Ruby handed him the letter with trembling fingers. It contained only 5 words, "I know who you are. What does this mean?" the Duke asked, his expression grave. "I don't know," Ruby lied, avoiding his penetrating gaze. "Nonsense," the Dowager interjected. "It clearly refers to something specific. Is someone threatening you, child?" Ruby hesitated, torn between her lifelong habit of secrecy and her growing trust in these two people who had shown her such unexpected kindness. Perhaps we might speak privately," she finally suggested. Minutes later, they were ensconced in the Duke's study, a masculine domain of leather and mahogany that Ruby had never entered before. The Dowager settled into a comfortable chair while the Duke remained standing, his tall frame tense with concern. "Now, speak plainly," the Dowager commanded. "Who would send such a cryptic message?" Ruby took a deep breath. "I believe it may be from Lord Ravenscroft." "Ravenscroft?" The Duke frowned. "Why would he?" "Because he recognized me," Ruby interrupted. "Or rather, he recognized what I might be." With shaking fingers, she drew down the shoulder of her gown just enough to reveal the crown-shaped birthmark that had been her lifelong mystery and burden. The Dowager leaned forward, adjusting her spectacles. "A birthmark? Shaped like a crown? Most unusual." "It is more than unusual, Your Grace. It is identical to one described in historical records as belonging to the royal family of Valoria." The Duke's eyes widened. "Valoria? The kingdom I mentioned at the music hall?" Ruby nodded. "I was found as an infant by an English gentleman traveling through Valoria during the Revolution. I was wrapped in fine linens and wearing a medallion bearing the royal crest. My rescuer believed me to be Princess Rosalind, the infant daughter of King Frederick and Queen Eleanora, rumored to have been smuggled out during the palace siege. Good heavens, breathed the dowager. A princess? I have no proof beyond the birthmark and the medallion, Ruby admitted. The gentleman who rescued me died when I was 6, and I was placed in an orphanage. I've spent my life hiding the mark and my potential identity, fearing those who might wish the last Valerian heir eliminated. Like Ravencroft, the Duke said grimly. Who was deeply involved in Valerian affairs during the Revolution? On which side? The Dowager asked. That's unclear. Officially, Britain remained neutral. Unofficially. The Duke's expression darkened. There were rumors that certain British interests supported the revolutionaries for economic gain. Ruby's heart pounded. If Ravencroft was among those supporters, he would have reason to fear a legitimate heir reclaiming the throne. Especially now, the Duke added. Valoria's current government is unstable. There have been murmurs of counter-revolution, of restoring the monarchy. The Dowager rose with surprising agility for a woman of her years. Well, this changes everything. If there's even a possibility that you are Princess Rosalind, we must protect you until your claim can be verified. Ruby stared at her in astonishment. You believe me? My dear, I've lived long enough to know that truth is often stranger than fiction. Besides, you have always carried yourself with a natural nobility that belies your circumstances. The Duke stepped forward, taking Ruby's hand in his. No harm will come to you while you're under my protection. I swear it. The intensity in his eyes made Ruby's breath catch. Why would you risk involving yourself in such a matter, Your Grace? For a moment, vulnerability flashed across his aristocratic features. Because you've become important to me, Ruby. The Dowager cleared her throat loudly. Yes, well, romantic declarations can wait. First, we must secure proof of Ruby's identity and determine what Ravencroft knows. And there we have it, dear listeners. The mysterious birthmark revealed at last, and with it, our heroine's potential royal lineage. Not to mention our Duke's growing affections. But danger lurks in the form of the sinister Lord Ravencroft, and secrets long buried are about to surface in most dramatic fashion. The following days passed in a whirlwind of clandestine activity. The Duke dispatched trusted agents to research Valerian history and the fate of the royal family, while the Dowager consulted her extensive network of aristocratic connections for information on Lord Ravencroft's past activities. Ruby, meanwhile, found herself under the Duke's constant protection. He rarely left her side, accompanying her and the Dowager to every social engagement and ensuring that Ruby was never alone in public. This arrangement led to inevitable speculation throughout London society. The Duke of Langley, besotted with his grandmother's companion. Lady Penelope remarked acidly at Lady Hathaway's garden party. How utterly declasse. Yet one cannot deny they make a striking pair, her companion replied, watching as Thomas led Ruby through the rose garden, their heads bent close in conversation. And she carries herself like a born lady, despite her mysterious origins. Indeed, something had shifted in Ruby's demeanor since revealing her secret. The constant vigilance she had maintained all her life had eased, allowing her natural grace and dignity to shine through more prominently. You seem different, Thomas observed as they paused beside a marble fountain, far enough from other guests to speak privately. More yourself, somehow. Ruby smiled. Perhaps because I no longer bear my secret alone. Though I still fear what Ravencroft might do. He's been remarkably quiet since sending that note. My sources report he's making arrangements to travel abroad, possibly to Valoria itself. To gather evidence against me? Or to eliminate any proof of my claim? Either way, we must move quickly. Thomas hesitated, then added, I've located someone who might confirm your identity. The former royal physician to the Valerian court lives in retirement in Bath. He attended your birth, if you are indeed Princess Rosalind, and would have documented the birthmark. Ruby's heart leapt. When can we see him? I've arranged for us to travel to Bath tomorrow. Grandmother will accompany us, of course, for propriety's sake. Of course, Ruby agreed, though propriety was the least of her concerns when faced with the possibility of confirming her true identity at last. As they returned to the main gathering, they found the Dowager engaged in animated conversation with a distinguished gentleman Ruby didn't recognize. "Ah, Thomas, Miss Valemont," the Dowager called. "Allow me to present Baron Westfield, who has just returned from extensive travels in Eastern Europe." The Baron bowed elegantly. "A pleasure, Your Grace." "And Miss Valemont, what an unusual name. Might I inquire as to its origin?" Before Ruby could respond, Thomas intervened smoothly. "Miss Valemont's family history is a personal matter, Baron. I'm sure you understand." "Of course." The Baron's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Though I must say, Miss Valemont bears a striking resemblance to someone I encountered during my time abroad. In Valoria, I believe." Ruby felt Thomas stiffen beside her. "An interesting observation, Baron. Perhaps you might share your Valerian experiences with us another time. For now, I believe my grandmother is fatigued and requires our assistance." As they escorted the Dowager toward their waiting carriage, Ruby whispered, "He knows something." "Indeed," Thomas replied grimly. "And I suspect he's in communication with Ravenscroft. We must leave for Bath at first light." Dawn had barely broken when the Duke's well-appointed travelling coach departed London, carrying Ruby, Thomas, and the Dowager toward Bath. They travelled swiftly, stopping only to change horses at the best posting houses along the route. "I haven't had such an adventure in decades," the Dowager declared, clearly enjoying the intrigue despite the seriousness of their mission. "Though I must say, these roads do nothing for my rheumatism." Ruby smiled fondly at the older woman who had become so dear to her in such a short time. "I cannot thank you enough for your support, Your Grace." "Nonsense, child. If you're truly Princess Rosalind, I shall have the distinction of having played piquet with royalty. Quite a feather in my cap, wouldn't you say?" Thomas shook his head at his grandmother's levity, but Ruby could see the affection in his eyes. The relationship between grandmother and grandson was one of genuine love beneath their bantering exchanges. As the journey continued, Ruby found herself watching Thomas covertly, admiring the strong profile and the quiet authority he exuded. How strange that a man she had once thought cold and arrogant now seemed the very embodiment of protection and honor. "You're staring, Miss Valemont," he murmured, catching her gaze. Ruby blushed. "Forgive me. I was just thinking how fortunate I am to have found allies in you and the Dowager." "Is that all we are to you? Allies?" There was an undercurrent in his voice that made her pulse quicken. Before she could formulate a response, the coach lurched violently, nearly throwing them from their seats. "What the devil?" Thomas shouted, steadying both Ruby and his grandmother. The sounds of shouting and the crack of pistol fire came from outside. Thomas's face hardened as he reached beneath the seat and withdrew a pistol of his own. "Highwayman," he said grimly, though the timing seemed suspiciously convenient. "Ravenscroft," Ruby whispered, fear clutching at her heart. "Stay inside, both of you. Lock the door behind me." With those words, Thomas opened the coach door and leapt out, pistol at the ready. The Dowager immediately produced a small derringer from her reticule. At Ruby's astonished expression, she shrugged. "One doesn't reach my age without learning to be prepared, my dear." Outside, the sounds of struggle continued. Ruby peered anxiously through the window, catching glimpses of Thomas engaged in combat with masked assailants. His coachman and footman were fighting valiantly, but they were outnumbered. "We must help them," Ruby declared, reaching for the door. "And what do you propose to do?" "Swoon at the villains," the Dowager retorted. "I grew up in orphanages, Your Grace. I learned to defend myself long ago." Before the Dowager could protest further, Ruby had slipped out of the coach, picking up a fallen branch as she did so. She approached stealthily from behind as one of the attackers prepared to strike Thomas from behind. With all her strength, Ruby brought the branch down on the man's head, sending him crumpling to the ground. Thomas whirled, his eyes widening in shock and anger. "Get back in the coach," he shouted. Behind you! Ruby warned as another assailant approached. Thomas ducked just in time, then dispatched his attacker with a well-placed punch. The remaining highwaymen, seeing their companions fallen, retreated hastily into the surrounding woods. In the sudden silence, Thomas strode toward Ruby, his expression thunderous. "You could have been killed. What were you thinking?" "That I'd rather die fighting alongside you than cower while you risked your life for me," she replied, her chin raised defiantly. Something in his expression shifted, anger giving way to an emotion far more complex and powerful. Without warning, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with fierce intensity. Ruby responded instinctively, her arms wrapping around his neck as she returned his kiss with equal passion. For a moment, the world disappeared. There was only Thomas, his strength, his warmth, the incredible feeling of rightness in his embrace. "Well, it's about time," came the Dowager's amused voice from the coach window. "Though perhaps you might continue this particular activity somewhere less public and more comfortable." They broke apart, both flushed and breathing heavily. Thomas kept his arm firmly around Ruby's waist as he surveyed the scene. "This was no random attack," he said. "One of the men dropped this." He held up a medallion identical to the one Ruby had kept hidden all her life, the royal crest of Valoria. "They meant to kidnap or kill me," Ruby said softly. "And they may try again." Thomas helped her back into the coach. "We must reach Bath with all haste." As the journey resumed, Ruby sat closer to Thomas than propriety might dictate, drawing comfort from his presence. The kiss they had shared hung between them, unspoken but undeniable, a declaration of feelings too powerful to be constrained by differences in their stations. Oh, dear listeners! A highway attack, a daring rescue, and a passionate kiss amid danger. Could anything be more romantic? Yet greater perils and revelations await our courageous couple in Bath. They reached Bath by nightfall, proceeding directly to a modest but respectable house on the outskirts of the city. Despite the late hour, the elderly gentleman who answered the door seemed to have been expecting them. "Your Grace," he bowed to Thomas. "Dr. Edmund Hammond, at your service. Please, come in quickly." The doctor led them to a well-appointed study lined with medical texts and curious instruments. His keen eyes immediately focused on Ruby. "So this is the young lady?" he asked, adjusting his spectacles. "The resemblance is quite remarkable." "Resemblance?" Ruby's voice trembled slightly. "To your mother, Queen Eleanora." She had the same violet eyes, a distinctive trait of the Valerian royal line. Dr. Hammond gestured to a chair. "Please, sit. I understand there is a birthmark I should examine." With the Dowager's assistance, Ruby modestly revealed the crown-shaped mark on her shoulder. Dr. Hammond studied it intently, then consulted a leather-bound journal from his bookshelf. "Yes," he murmured. "Precisely as I recorded it at her birth. Size, shape, location, all identical." He looked up, his expression solemn. "I can confirm without doubt that you are Princess Rosalind Sophia Eleanor of Valoria." The room spun around Ruby. After a lifetime of uncertainty, to have her identity confirmed so definitively was overwhelming. She felt Thomas's hand close over hers, anchoring her to reality. "There's more," Dr. Hammond continued. "The revolution that overthrew the monarchy was orchestrated by a consortium of foreign interests, including several British nobles with investments in Valoria's mineral resources." "Ravencroft," Thomas said grimly. "Among others, yes. They funded the revolutionaries, then profited enormously when the new government granted them exclusive mining rights. But now that government is collapsing. There have been riots in the capital, calls for restoration of the monarchy. Which explains why Ravencroft feels threatened by Ruby's existence," the Dowager concluded. "If she were to claim her throne, his entire fortune could be at risk," Thomas finished. "Along with his freedom, should his role in the revolution become known." Dr. Hammond nodded gravely. "Precisely. Which makes the princess's position extremely precarious until her identity can be publicly established and proper protection arranged." "How do we do that?" Ruby asked. "I have connections with the Foreign Office," Thomas said. With Dr. Hammond's testimony and documentation, we can present your case directly to the Prince Regent. His support would be invaluable. And in the meantime, the Dowager asked practically. Thomas's expression hardened with determination. In the meantime, we protect Ruby at all costs. They spent the night at the Royal Crescent Hotel, with Thomas insisting on rooms with adjoining doors and armed footmen posted in the corridor. Despite these precautions, Ruby slept little, her mind racing with the implications of Dr. Hammond's confirmation. She was a princess, the rightful queen of Valoria. After a lifetime as an orphan, a servant, a companion, she now faced the prospect of reclaiming a throne and responsibility for an entire nation. At dawn, unable to rest any longer, she slipped out onto the small balcony adjoining her room. The golden light of sunrise baths elegant Georgian architecture, creating a scene of perfect tranquility that belied the turmoil in her heart. The soft click of a door announced Thomas's presence before his voice did. "You should be resting," he said, joining her on the balcony. Despite the early hour, he was immaculately dressed, though the shadows beneath his eyes suggested he had slept no better than she. "How can I rest? Everything has changed." "Has it?" He turned to face her fully. "You are still Ruby, the same woman who stood up to a duke when she was but a maid, who challenged me to see beyond station and circumstance. But I'm also Princess Rosalind now. With duties and responsibilities I scarcely understand." "Yes. And whatever path you choose, whatever duties you embrace," Thomas took her hands in his expression more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "Know that I will stand beside you, if you'll have me." Ruby's heart soared even as doubt clouded her joy. "Thomas, you're a duke. Your family, your position in society, mean nothing compared to what I feel for you." His hands tightened on hers. "I love you, Ruby. Princess or servant, it makes no difference to my heart." Tears filled Ruby's eyes. "And I love you. But, no buts." Thomas smiled tenderly. "Whatever challenges lie ahead, we'll face them together." The sound of carriage wheels on the street below interrupted their moment. Thomas moved to the balcony edge, his posture instantly alert. "Ravenscroft," he said grimly. "And the Baron. They must have followed us from London." Ruby's blood turned cold. "How did they find us so quickly?" "It doesn't matter. We need to leave immediately." Thomas strode back into the room, pulling the bell cord to summon a servant. "Pack only what's essential. We'll depart through the servants' entrance." Within minutes, they had roused the Dowager and were making their way through the hotel's back passages. Thomas's valet, a resourceful man who had served the Duke for years, had procured a nondescript traveling coach that awaited them in a side alley. "Where are we going?" Ruby asked as they settled inside. "To London," Thomas replied. "Directly to Carlton House. The Prince Regent must hear your story before Ravenscroft can interfere." The journey back to London was conducted with even greater haste and caution than their trip to Bath. They avoided main roads where possible and changed horses at obscure posting houses rather than the well-known stops. "I feel like a character in one of those ridiculous Gothic novels," the Dowager commented, though her usual sharpness was tempered by genuine concern. "Fleeing villains and racing to the seat of power. Life occasionally imitates even the most melodramatic literature, grandmother," Thomas replied, his gaze fixed on the road behind them, watching for signs of pursuit. Ruby sat quietly, drawing strength from Thomas's steady presence beside her. Whatever happened next, she knew with absolute certainty that his love was genuine, a rare and precious gift amid the chaos her life had become. As they approached London, however, Thomas grew increasingly tense. "Something's wrong," he murmured. "There should be more traffic on this road." No sooner had he spoken than their coach rounded a bend to find the way blocked by 3 mounted men, their faces concealed by scarves. "An ambush," Thomas said grimly, reaching for his pistol. "Ruby, stay down." But before they could react further, riders appeared on both sides of the coach, surrounding them completely. The door was wrenched open to reveal Lord Ravenscroft, his cold eyes gleaming with triumph. "Your Grace," he said with mock politeness. And the so-called Princess Rosalind. How convenient to find you together. Step out, if you please. Thomas positioned himself protectively in front of Ruby. We'll do no such thing. Ravencroft sighed theatrically. Must we resort to violence? I have a dozen armed men at my command. Surely even your legendary courage recognizes the futility of resistance. The Dowager leaned forward, her aristocratic bearing undimmed by danger. What precisely do you want, Ravencroft? Money? Power? Or merely to conceal your treasonous activities in Valoria? A flash of anger crossed Ravencroft's face. What I want, madam, is to prevent this impostor from destabilizing a region whose resources are vital to British interests. Impostor? Ruby moved to Thomas's side, meeting Ravencroft's gaze directly. Dr. Hammond has confirmed my identity. Hammond is a senile old fool. And unfortunately, he met with an accident shortly after your visit. Ravencroft's cruel smile sent a chill through Ruby's heart. His house caught fire quite suddenly. Most tragic. Thomas's body tensed, his hand tightening on his pistol. You murdered him. Let's call it eliminating a threat to national security. As I'm prepared to do with all of you, unless, Ravencroft's gaze fixed on Ruby. Unless the princess agrees to renounce any claim to the Valerian throne and disappear permanently. And if I refuse, then the Duke and his grandmother will join Dr. Hammond in the afterlife, while you face a lifetime of confinement in an asylum. Quite simple, really. Ruby's mind raced. She couldn't allow Thomas and the Dowager to die for her cause, yet surrendering to Ravencroft meant abandoning her responsibility to her homeland and its people. Before she could respond, the thunder of approaching hooves broke the tense silence. A squadron of mounted soldiers in the royal livery appeared on the road, led by a resplendent figure Ruby recognized instantly from portraits and engravings. The Prince Regent, Thomas breathed, relief evident in his voice. Ravencroft's men scattered at the approach of the royal guards, leaving their leader exposed and suddenly alone. The Prince Regent, corpulent but imposing in his military dress, surveyed the scene with evident displeasure. Lord Ravencroft, he said, his voice carrying the weight of royal authority. I believe you have some explaining to do. Ravencroft attempted to bow, though his composure had clearly shattered. Your Royal Highness, I was merely threatening a peer of the realm, a Dowager Duchess, and the rightful Queen of Valoria. The prince's tone was dangerously mild. Most interesting. Especially in light of certain documents that arrived at Carlton House this morning. Thomas stepped forward. Documents, Your Royal Highness. From Dr. Edmund Hammond of Bath. The prince smiled at their shocked expressions. The good doctor anticipated trouble and dispatched copies of his evidence to several locations before your arrival. Most thorough gentleman. Then he's alive? Ruby asked hopefully. Very much so, though his library suffered some smoke damage. My guards reached him in time to prevent the worst of Ravencroft's mischief. At a signal from the prince, royal guards surrounded Ravencroft, who no longer bothered to maintain his mask of aristocratic composure. This is absurd. The girl is nothing but a servant. The Prince Regent's gaze fell on Ruby, taking in her bearing, her unusual violet eyes, and the quiet dignity with which she faced this crisis. I think not, he replied. Though I look forward to hearing the full story, from all parties, once we return to London. Oh, my dears! What a dramatic rescue! The Prince Regent himself arriving just in time, Ravencroft exposed, and our heroine's royal identity all but confirmed. But the greatest revelation is yet to come, *****. The ballroom at Carlton House glittered with hundreds of candles, illuminating the cream of London society gathered for what had been announced as a special diplomatic reception. Speculation ran rampant among the guests, who had been summoned with unusual urgency and minimal explanation. I heard it concerns affairs in some obscure European kingdom, Lady Penelope confided to her circle of intimates. Though why we should all be assembled for such a trifling matter is beyond comprehension. Perhaps because it involves the Duke of Langley, another guest suggested, nodding toward Thomas, who stood near the dais in full formal regalia. He's been absent from society for weeks, and now appears at the prince's right hand. And where is that companion of his? The one he was so oddly attentive to. As if in answer to her question, a fanfare sounded, and the Prince Regent entered the ballroom. Behind him came the Dowager Duchess of Langley, looking triumphant in regal purple. And then, a collective gasp rose from the assembled guests as Ruby appeared, transformed beyond recognition from the modest companion they had glimpsed at social gatherings. She wore a gown of silver tissue over lavender silk, embroidered with seed pearls and adorned with the royal insignia of Valoria. A delicate tiara of diamonds and amethysts crowned her dark hair, and around her neck hung the medallion she had carried since infancy, now set with precious gems. But it was not the finery that commanded attention. It was the regal composure with which Ruby carried herself, the unmistakable air of one born to rule. The Prince Regent raised his hand for silence, then addressed the stunned gathering. "My lords, ladies, and gentlemen. It is my great privilege to present Her Royal Highness, Princess Rosalind Sophia Eleanor of Valoria, rightful Queen of her nation and newly recognized ally of the British Crown." Murmurs of astonishment swept through the ballroom. The prince continued, "Through extraordinary circumstances, Princess Rosalind was saved from the revolution that claimed her parents' lives and raised in England without knowledge of her true identity. Now, with irrefutable proof of her lineage established, she prepares to reclaim her throne with the full support of the British government." Ruby stepped forward, her gaze finding Thomas among the crowd. The love in his eyes gave her courage as she addressed the elite of British society. "I stand before you as living proof that fate works in mysterious ways," she began, her clear voice carrying throughout the ballroom. 20 years ago, I was smuggled from my homeland as an infant. I grew up in orphanages, worked as a servant, and finally found a place as companion to the Dowager Duchess of Langley, to whom I owe an immeasurable debt of gratitude." The Dowager inclined her head regally, clearly relishing her role in this extraordinary tale. "In the coming months, I shall return to Valoria to fulfill my duty to my people," Ruby continued. "But I do not go alone." She extended her hand, and Thomas stepped forward to take it. "For I have been blessed with not only the recovery of my birthright, but the greatest gift of all, true love." Thomas raised her hand to his lips, his eyes never leaving hers. The Prince Regent cleared his throat meaningfully. "Yes, well, there is one small formality to address before the celebrations can truly begin." He gestured to a clergyman who had been standing discreetly to one side. "If the bride and groom would step forward." A ripple of excitement spread through the gathering as understanding dawned. This was to be not merely a diplomatic reception, but a royal wedding. With special license and the approval of the Crown, the Prince announced with evident satisfaction, "We shall witness the union of Her Royal Highness Princess Rosalind of Valoria and His Grace, Thomas Lockwood, Duke of Langley." As they took their positions before the clergyman, Thomas leaned close to whisper in Ruby's ear. "Are you certain? You could have any prince in Europe." Ruby smiled, her heart overflowing with joy. "I want only you, or the man who saw my worth when I was nothing but a servant." "I was a fool," Thomas replied, his voice rough with emotion. "You were always a queen, my queen, title or no title." And so, before the astonished elite of London society, the servant girl who became a princess married her duke, proving once and for all that true love recognizes nobility of spirit regardless of birth or circumstance. And there we have it, dear listeners. A servant revealed as royalty, a cold duke melted by true love, villains vanquished, and a happily ever after sealed with royal blessing. One can hardly imagine a more satisfying conclusion. Do tell us your rating, from 1 to 10, and where you're listening from. Until our next tale of romance and intrigue among the ton, this is your faithful narrator bidding you adieu.